Imagine a philosopher who writes about wisdom but believes that women are inferior people and slaves are people naturally doomed to obedience, and it is beneficial for them to be in slavery because they cannot survive without their master. Perhaps he really believed this, or perhaps he said things that were favorable to kings and elites in order to receive money and privileges. Let's try to figure it out. At the same time, it was this man who founded formal logic, explained heredity without knowledge of genetics, and consistently dominated university curricula for over 2,000 years. Today we will talk about Aristotle. Hello, you are on the channel, where in a pleasant atmosphere for the soul you can listen to a series of programs about the most significant ideas of humanity, as well as people who were the authors of those ideas that changed the course of history and made the world what it is now. Understanding these processes allows you to understand the unwritten rules of the game that operate in this world. Everyone can dispose of this information in their own individual way, from career growth and interaction with the opposite sex to simply peace of mind and satisfaction. Optimally, if you manage to combine the pleasant with the useful. After all, it is simply customary to know about a number of topics in intelligent society. And whether you will listen to it before going to bed, during training with headphones, while driving a car, or in any other situation, that is your choice. Today we're going to talk about Aristotle. Traditionally, for each character, we follow a plan that you can see on screen and in the timecode. We analyze his life path, what made him famous, how he got rich, who financed him, his contribution to the development of civilization, and how our character treated women. Finally, we analyze the hero using artificial intelligence and generate who he would be in the modern world, who he would vote for in the elections, how much money net worth he would have in modern money, and how many followers he would have on modern social media. Let's go. Chapter 1. The main reasons why people still remember Aristotle. The first thing that distinguishes him is his universal breadth of interests. Aristotle wrote treatises on metaphysics, ethics, politics, rhetoric, poetry, logic, zoology, botany, physics, and astronomy. No other ancient thinker covered so many fields at once. Aristotle is now often called the first true scientist because he pioneered the key principle of scientific research, careful, systematic observation of nature. However, the term science did not exist in his era. The term scientist would appear only in the 19th century, and in antiquity, he was called the first teacher or philosopher. It was Aristotle who laid the foundation stone for scientific research methods. And over the centuries, his method of observation will be supplemented by experimentation, hypothetical deductive method, induction, abduction, mathematical modeling, correlation method, longitudinal and cross-sectional studies, and others. The memory of Aristotle survived only because after the fall of the Roman Empire, his works were preserved only by Arabs and a few Greek Christian scribes. It was only in the 11th and 12th centuries that Arab commentators, Avicenna, Al-Farabi, and Western scholastics, Thomas Aquinas, brought him back into European intellectual circulation. In addition to his philosophical works, Aristotle also founded formal biology, classification of animals, political science, and virtue ethics. Neither nature reserves nor parliamentary debates will be possible without his system of categories today. Chapter 2. Interesting facts about Aristotle. Loud debauchery in his youth. According to one biography, young Aristotle squandered his inheritance on feasts and parties, so he was forced to join the army of Philip II to feed himself. Expulsion from Athens and a loud oath. After the death of Alexander the Great, Aristotle was accused of impiety, and he fled to Chalcedon, saying, "I will not allow the Athenians to sin against philosophy a second time." Affair with slave Herpyllis and son Nicomacheus. At the end of his life in Athens, the scientist had an intimate relationship with his slave Herpyllis, from whom his son Nicomacheus was born. His main ethical treatise, Nicomachean Ethics, is named after him. The legend of Philida, who rode and abused him. According to a medieval legend, as a punishment for Alexander the Great, his beloved Philida forced Aristotle to run on all fours, like on a horse, to prove that love makes even the wisest stink. He was very fond of talking about bees. He considered them deaf and untrained, but at the same time admired their practical wisdom, interpreted without any instructions. Pythias' first wife is no ordinary wife. Pythias, the adopted daughter of the ruler Hermias, not only helped Aristotle collect materials for the encyclopedia, but also, according to some sources, classified zoological specimens from Lesbos. Chapter 3. Aristotle's contribution to science, culture, and civilization in general. Logic. Aristotle founded formal logic. In the Categories and Analects, he outlined the first system of deductive reasoning, the syllogism, which proves a conclusion from two premises. This tool has become the cornerstone of any scientific argumentation. Biology. For the first time in the history of philosophy, he combined observation with classification. He described more than 540 species of animals and proposed 4 biological causes to explain processes in living nature. These 4 reasons are as follows. 1. Material cause. Explains what a living organism is made of. For example, in plants, these are cell walls, cell fluids, proteins, fats, etc. 2. Formal cause. Responsible for the configuration or structure of an organism, its anatomical and morphological features. In biology, this is the genetic plan or body architecture that conveys the characteristic features of a species. 3. Effective, efficient cause. Refers to the agents that cause birth or change, parental seed, environment, hormonal or cellular processes. In reproduction, it is the factor that triggers embryo development, fertilization. 4. Final, teleological cause. Shows why an organism or part of it exists, i.e., the ultimate goal or function. For example, loud singing of birds to attract mates, or the scent of flowers to attract pollinators. Each of these causes is necessary for a holistic explanation of a biological phenomenon. The material and formal causes provide the internal structure, the effective cause provides the mechanism of occurrence, and the final cause provides the direction of development. Together, they constitute Aristotle's fundamental scheme for analyzing living nature. Metaphysics. In his treatise Metaphysics, he formed the concept of substance, dividing existence into form and matter, which formed the basis of philosophical discussions in the following centuries. Culture. In the Poetics, Aristotle laid down the concept of catharsis and the rules for constructing a tragedy, which later became the canon of European drama. Here are 6 basic elements of tragedy according to Aristotle, with a brief explanation of each. 1. Plot. The most important element, the structure of events and their internal logic. A tragedy should have a clearly constructed beginning, middle, and end with twists and turns, peripeteia, and a revelation anagnorisis that evokes sympathy and fear in the audience. 2. Character. Characters should be morally good or appropriate to the story, consistent in their actions and such that their suffering evokes an emotional response. 3. Thought. Ideas and arguments that characters express in speeches, the actual moral and philosophical essence of the tragedy, is expressed in dialogues. 4. Language. The style and form of expression, rhythm, eloquence, correspondence of the language to the character and the situation on stage. 5. Melody. Vocal and choral elements, music, choral singing, intonation that enhance the emotional effect of the tragedy. 6. Spectacle. The visual part, costume, scenery, staging. According to Aristotle, the least artistic of the elements, but important for the overall impression. Each of these 6 elements is interconnected and together creates a coherent, emotionally powerful tragedy that evokes catharsis in the audience. Ethics. Nicomachean ethics define virtue as the middle ground between excess and lack and influence the formation of moral doctrines in the Christian and Islamic traditions. Political theory. In the Politics, he outlined a typology of states, arguing for the role of the middle class in state stability. Aristotle distinguished between 3 right forms of government aimed at the common good and their 3 alter egos that serve the interests of the rulers. These pairs form natural antagonisms looks like monarchy, tyranny, aristocracy, oligarchy, polity, constitutional state, democracy. Monarchy, it's a single ruler who rules for the common good and plays the role of the father of the state. Tyranny, it's a distorted monarchy in which the ruler rules for his or her own benefit using fear and coercion. Aristocracy, it's ruled by the most virtuous and knowledgeable individuals who are committed to the common good. Oligarchy, it's distorted aristocracy. Power belongs to wealthy or privileged groups and serves their interests. Politics, it's ruled by the many, often the middle class, by law and proportionality, mixing elements of democracy and oligarchy, a healthy form of government. Democracy, it's a distorted politics where the ruling circles rule for their own benefit rather than with the common good in mind. The opinions of the illiterate and lower classes are manipulated in order to maintain power. These 6 forms are immortalized in the 3rd chapter of Politics and remain the fundamental classification of political regimes in the Western tradition. The university canon. Until the 19th century, Aristotle's logic, metaphysics, ethics, and politics were part of the required course in European and Islamic universities. Toward the end of the 19th century, Aristotle's approaches began to be replaced by experimental philosophy and Newtonian mechanics, and the structure of universities underwent profound reforms based on the Humboldt model, 1809 to 1810, which shifted the emphasis from teaching by authority to original research. Chapter 4. In what ways was he wrong and mistaken? And what kind of objective criticism can he be subjected to? Despite his genius, Aristotle accumulated as many mistakes as he did discoveries. In some cases, it took other scholars more than 1,000 years to correct some of his mistakes. For example, the main gems of the great thinker are: 1. The spontaneous origin of life. Aristotle proposed that oysters, eels, and even insects come to life from silt and rotting garbage, without the participation of parental seeds. This absurd idea existed in science until the 17th and 18th centuries, and was finally rejected only thanks to the experiments of Francesco Redi and Louis Pasteur. 2. Errors in physics and natural places. He believed that the speed of a body's fall is directly proportional to its weight, and that every object tends to its natural place, earth, down, up. He also described Newton's first law exactly the opposite way. As a result, he blocked the modern experimental approach and delayed the development of dynamics for 1,500 years, until Galileo and Newton broke through Aristotle's authority and proved him wrong. 3. The theory of the four elements. All bodies, according to Aristotle, consisted only of fire, air, water, and earth. Today, this looks like medieval chemistry without any experimental basis, which slowed down the development of chemical science and atomistics. Also, thousands of people in the Middle Ages were tortured by alchemists who were inspired by this idea of Aristotle. 4. Teleological redundancy. Aristotle placed final causes, why an object, person, or phenomenon exists, above effective ones, reducing the entire nature of things to ends, ignoring mechanics and chance. Modern scientists consider this theologizing of nature to be an anachronism that distracted attention from rational experiments. 5. Defense of natural slavery. In the Politics, Aristotle argued that some people are natural slaves who benefit from serving others. This apologetic for slavery was covered by logic, but in fact justified violence and oppression. In ancient Greece during the time of Aristotle, 4th century BC, slavery was widespread, and slaves came from a variety of regions and ethnic groups. Slaves were not defined by the color of their skin, as they were in later historical contexts, such as colonial America. Instead, slaves became slaves through captivity in wars, piracy, debt insolvency, or being born to slaves. The majority of slaves in ancient Greece in Aristotle's time were light-skinned, 70 to 90%, because they came from neighboring regions inhabited by Indo-European or related peoples. Dark-skinned slaves from Africa were rare, less than 1 to 5%, and people from the Middle East Arabs made up a proportion of 5 to 10%. Precise data is not available, but these estimates are based on historical sources about trade and warfare at the time. 6. Misogyny and sexism. Considered women to be incomplete men born of menstrual blood and having less vital heat. These views legitimized the oppression of women in Europe and the Islamic world for thousands of years. However, in the course of research in the 20th and 21st centuries, the scientific community has established that the difference between men and women is not so significant and is largely due to different upbringings, different social attitudes, and different social expectations. And individual differences are greater than intergroup or intersex differences. 7. The heart as the center of the mind fallacy. Aristotle argued that thinking takes place in the heart, and the brain serves to cool the blood. The refusal to recognize the role of the brain postponed the development of neurophysiology for centuries. 8. Biological inaccuracies. Aristotle managed to count the teeth of women correctly. He thought they were fewer than those of men. 9. Errors in embryology. Aristotle explains that the male seed is formed from the condensed and purified residue of blood, which the male body boiled through internal fire and heat production, while the female body does not have sufficient heat for such a process. Aristotle attached an excessive, almost magical importance to heat, so much so that all genetic power, in his view, depended on the degree to which sperm was heated to the ideal temperature. At the same time, Aristotle considered sperm to be a hot liquid and female secretions to be cold. I remind you that thermometers did not exist at that time, and he may have determined this simply by touching his hands. He argued that the right male testicle is hotter than the left, so seeds from the right side of the male body are supposedly more capable of fertilization, which modern physiology does not confirm. According to Aristotle, it is the hot seed that penetrates the cold and wet menstrual discharge, cooks it, and turns it into the substance of a new organism, the embryo. This teleological approach also explains sexual differentiation. If the warmth of the seed equalizes the cold of the female environment, a boy is born. If not, a girl is born. 10. Geocentric worldview. Cosmology maintained a static, geocentric universe where all celestial bodies revolve around a fixed Earth. This model conservatism slowed down astronomical observations until the time of Copernicus and Galileo. Critics call Aristotle an intellectual oppressor because many of his errors dominated the Academy for centuries. However, recognizing his shortcomings helps to appreciate the true scientific revolution that brought humanity out of the darkness of Aristotelian dogma. It was after the debunking of Aristotle's myths and dogmas that scientific and technological progress took place. It is true. In Aristotle's time, people fought with spears, swords, and arrows. And they fought like that for 2,000 years. In the second half of the 17th century, Sir Isaac Newton debunked the cult of Aristotle, and 200 years later, humanity fought with a nuclear bomb. It's amazing. Chapter 5. What were Aristotle's political and ideological views on the political coordinate map? Aristotle belongs to authoritarian conservative thinkers with center-right economic views, as he advocated hierarchy, natural slavery, strict authority, monarchy/oligarchy, and private property. At the same time, he criticized the excessive ambitions of rulers, advocated a golden mean, polity, and the moral function of the state. His position was closely connected with the interests of the Macedonian dynasty. Here he played the role of a court expert, which adds an element of lobbying. The philosopher presented those arguments that were favorable to the ruler and convenient for maintaining his power. For example, Aristotle advocated an authoritarian hierarchy, slavery, and the natural order. Aristotle considered slavery to be natural and justified that some people are by nature incapable of mental effort and therefore rightly rely on the domination of others. He argued that slavery and power are seen as a benefit for the slaves themselves, because the virtuous master supposedly teaches and protects them. Economic beliefs. Aristotle rejected Plato's communism of family and land, arguing that the personal interest of the owner stimulates culture and hard work. He praised the polity, a mixed middle-class constitution that restrained the extremes of poverty and wealth, and was critical of democracy, where the rich rule for themselves and the poor rule for themselves. He was not without political loyalty and lobbying in the service of the Macedonian dynasty. Aristotle was the tutor of Alexander the Great, and on behalf of King Philip II, by hereditary treaty, he educated the future King of Kings, so his lectures had a political overtone that was pleasing to the dynasty. Roughly speaking, he taught his students that the king is good and does everything right, and for this he received state funding and a protectorate from the king. Also, while Aristotle condemned oligarchic enrichment, he also defended the legitimacy of those elite power clans that are convenient for maintaining centralized rule. To summarize, Aristotle formally maintained philosophical neutrality, but his method of tailoring arguments to the interests of rulers makes him a forerunner of modern expert lobbyists. He justified hierarchy and private property, praised a strong monarch, and criticized democracy when it threatened order. That is why he should be placed in the right authoritarian quadrant of the modern political compass, just like the experts who lobby for the interests of the ruling elites today in authoritarian countries where the government does not change, elections are not held, and society is divided into classes and controlled by the security forces. Chapter 6. What was his social status at birth and in old age? Aristotle was born into a wealthy but not aristocratic family. His father Nicomachus was the personal physician of the Macedonian king Amyntas III. Although the family had a decent income due to Nicomachus' court status, they did not belong to the Macedonian nobility. As a young man, according to the thinker himself and later commentators, he squandered a considerable inheritance on public parties, feasts, women, and amphitheaters, what we would now call nightclubs. In the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle himself admits that he destroyed himself through wastefulness, and that this lifestyle leads to the loss of life and dignity. When his father's inheritance was squandered, the young philosopher had to look for new sources of income. After the devastation, Aristotle allegedly joined the army of King Philip II, but not as a simple infantryman, but as a member of the elite of the court due to his family and education. It was there that he first met the young Alexander the Great. It is said that they even had homosexual relations, whether in an active or passive form. No historical records have been preserved. Since not only boys but also girls are born in elite circles, he met not only the king's son but also the daughter of the ruler, Hermia, which cemented his status in the Macedonian nobility. As soon as Aristotle married the daughter of the ruler, his career took off. And when his former close friend Alexander the Great became king, Aristotle's career took off like a rocket into space. After Alexander became king, 336 BC, the patronage of the court allowed the philosopher to quickly return to Athens and found his own school of the Peripatetics. After Alexander's death, Antigonidas lost his patronage in Aristotle, who abruptly turned from a genius into a jester. He was accused of impiety, and Aristotle fled to Euboea, where he died the same year. After his exile, he was no longer wealthy. The loss of patronage and exile undermined his material and social status. Chapter 7. How did he treat and speak about women? Aristotle considered women to be more emotional, envious, prone to tears, and less rational than men, and compared their minds to matter that needs a form. Such views laid the foundation for educational and cultural discrimination against women in the Western philosophical tradition. Aristotle viewed women as inferior to men in terms of the traditional hymenal medicine of his time, arguing that the female body, of colder matter, provides only the material basis for gestation, while the male body provides the form and active creative force. He wrote in Politics, "As for the sexes, man is by nature superior and woman inferior. Man is the ruler, woman is the subordinate." Aristotle had only one official marriage to Pythias, the daughter of the ruler Hermias. This marriage lasted about 10 years. This marriage gave birth to a daughter, Pythias the Younger, but her exact fate is not known. Aristotle also had an extramarital relationship with Herpyllis from Stagira. She was of a simple family, a servant or even a slave. After the death of Pythias, Aristotle took Herpyllis into his home, provided her with housing and a dowry in his will, leaving her the right to live in his house or marry on decent terms. Herpyllis gave birth to a son, Nicomachus, in honor of his grandfather, whom Aristotle protected with guardianship until he came of age. In a word, modern feminists would have cancelled Aristotle. There is no doubt about it. Chapter 8. AI Generation. Who would Aristotle be now? 1. Political preferences. Aristotle highly valued stable institutions, the principle of separation of powers and legal regulation forms of government, the golden mean, which resonates with moderate modern conservatism. He is unlikely to support radical leftist or woke movements, but he would not unconditionally criticize moderate social reforms. Most likely politically, he would have sympathized with the Republican Party for its emphasis on institutions and order, but would have appreciated pragmatic cooperation with democratic governments. Who would Aristotle vote for in today's world? If Aristotle lived in modern America, his philosophy of conservative authoritarianism, hierarchy and law, virtuous monarchy/politics, would most closely align with moderate Republicans and his criticism of populism and radical leftist movements. He would probably give the highest sympathy to politicians such as Mitt Romney and less to progressive Democrats. In the Kamala/Trump pairing, his choice would lean toward Donald Trump, but not without reservations about violating institutional norms. On a scale of 0 to 100, Aristotle would have supported Donald Trump. Mitt Romney with 85 points out of 100. He is a moderate conservative who favors institutionalism, the rule of law, and private property, which is close to politics. Donald Trump at 70 points out of 100. His support for a strong leader and national order coincides with Aristotle's authoritarian tendencies, but his populism and deviation from norms would have worried Aristotle. Kamala Harris scored 45 points out of 100. Democratic liberal positions on equality and social justice contradict Aristotle's paternalism and hierarchy. Aristotle was also a sexist. When analyzing the likelihood of support in favor of foreign leaders, artificial intelligence gives the following estimates. Xi Jinping, 90 points out of 100. An absolute supreme leader, a vigilant paternalist who combines authoritarianism with a virtuous imperative and centralized control over all spheres of life. Vladimir Putin, 80 points out of 100. A strong ruler with a firm hand, emphasized patriotism and centralization of power, but Xi's lower score is due to a lower level of virtue and more populism. Javier Milei, 20 points out of 100. a libertarian politician who calls for radical minarchism and dismantling of state institutions, which is the exact opposite of Aristotle's virtuous politics and his hierarchical vision. Aristotle's financial status and social influence. Given the legacy of his schools and intellectual patents for methods and concepts, Aristotle would have been a multi-millionaire today. Estimating the income from university licenses, books, and online courses is about $50 to $100 million. Social media. As a popular science blogger and authoritative philosopher, he almost certainly would have Twitter, X, 1 to 2 million subscribers. YouTube, 500 to 700,000 stable viewers for a series of lectures. LinkedIn, 200 to 300,000 professional followers. However, he would have had these followers until he was canceled and banned by feminists after another pearl. Family and family values. Aristotle would have valued traditional marriage as a basis for community stability, but would have introduced the doctrine of equal partnership and duties. Aristotle tended to favor the idea that it is optimal to have one wife from a good family and with a good education, to have 2 to 3 children with her, who should be brought up according to the principle of the middle ground, a balance between freedom and discipline. Attitude to modern movements. Aristotle would have been neither a woke activist nor a radical traditionalist, a fan of Andrew Tate. Aristotle would have advocated equality of opportunity for women. Times and norms change, and much has changed in the 2,400 years since Aristotle's youth. However, with equality of opportunity, he would also emphasize the separation of roles and customs as a cultural basis. That is, he would not have been too bothered by the fact that maids and nannies are 90% women, and electricians and plumbers are 90% men. Aristotle would consider this a natural logical norm. That's the kind of man Aristotle was. What do you think about this? Write in the comments what you remember or are most interested in. It will be interesting to read your opinion. If you liked it, please like and subscribe. This will help promote the channel. I'll keep doing my best. We still have a lot of interesting stories and characters to tell. By the way, you can write in the comments about someone else who has done a similar analysis lecture that you can comfortably listen to before bed, while cooking, with headphones on at a workout, or in the car on the way to work. I am happy to do my best for you, and my effort is to make the content both interesting and useful at the same time. This is one of the principles of happiness discussed by Professor Tal Ben-Shahar in his Harvard lecture course on the psychology of happiness. I hope to see you soon. All the best to you.